I want to welcome all of you to the Marines Memorial Theater. And if you haven't done so, please turn off your cell phone, put it on silence at this time. See a couple of people grabbing their pockets. Excellent. The Marines Memorial building was built in 1926, originally as the Women's Athletic Club, the Western Women. This was the first women's athletic club west of the Mississippi River back then. Then the Navy took it over during the Second World War, and the Marines took it over in 1946. It's got a great history, and if you haven't been here and toured the spaces, please take your time and do that at some time. We're proud to host another in our series of the major United States Marine Corps George P. Shultz Lecture Series. Now, I guess I should have really said the Secretary George Shultz Lecture Series, but after all, this is the Marines Memorial, so I figured, I would at least start where he really started his public service life, so thank you for that, sir. Secretary Shultz, Major and then former Secretary Shultz, was an American statesman, businessman, economist, author, took various positions in 3 different administrations, was a major player in the foreign policy for the Reagan administration, and is one of 2 people that held 4 prominent cabinet positions. Now, who would have ever thought, when I was a major and we were majors and stuff, who'd ever thought you'd have been that? But congratulations with that, sir. This floor is yours. Michael?
Well, here's a little background on how this came about. Mike Myatt came to see me quite a long while ago, and he said, I'd like to establish a lectureship in my honor here. And I said, Mike, come on. There are more lectures in San Francisco. What do we know? We talked about it some more, and we said, okay, our lecturer will always be a high-ranking military officer. Nobody else in San Francisco will touch that. So we'd be unique. And it was a time when relations in San Francisco, all the military places had moved out, and the Vietnam War soured the so there's a little tension. So we wondered who would come. Finally, we got Jim Jones when he was Commandant of the Marine Corps to come. I think he wore a bullet at best. But he came. It all went off nicely, and good questions from the audience, and he had a good time. So we've had a succession. It's been a great success. And it has helped to bring the military and the community together. I remember one time, Mike, we had a ceremony in Union Square for Korean War heroes or something like that. And afterwards, we had prearranged that the Marine Corps band would march from Union Square to the Marine Memorial. And huge numbers of San Franciscans followed, clapping and screaming. And I said, Mike, we just turned a corner. So Fleet Week, done the same thing. The military comes, they lay down a field hospital, and the citizens can see how fantastic it is to have the military around. So it has helped to bring us together. And Mike, he's a genius, Mike Myatt, and he's done a great job, and he recruited a terrific successor to help run this place. So I'm looking forward to HR's comments, and so be it.
So there it is, ladies and gentlemen. But so how do I top that? I top that by recognizing. Now, I met this gentleman back in 1985 aboard a ship in the Mediterranean in a tough time that the world was going through then. And he was my boss. He was a colonel back then, and I was a major. And we put together the Special Operations Program for the Marine Corps. He's been my predecessor. He was here for 17 years in the Marines Memorial. And as the secretary said, he got not only this program, the Fleet Week going, but he's kept the Marines Memorial on a steady keel. Please, a round of applause for General Mike Myatt, United States Marines. So we've got a moderator tonight, and we've got General McMaster going to speak. Gentlemen, if you would come out, please. Our moderator tonight is Mike Cerre. Mike is a graduate of Notre Dame. I'm not going to go through his entire bio, but he was a Marine officer in Vietnam, and he's no stranger to the Marines Memorial, as he's been a long-time member of this, and he stops by frequently. His biography is in your folder. He's got a plethora of awards of things he's done. He's a special correspondent for the NewsHour, and he's more than ready to go for this thing. He's interviewed a number of people. So thanks, Mike, for being here. Round of applause for Mike, please. Our honored guest speaker tonight, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, United States Army, retired, and the 26th Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs. His bio is in your pamphlet. You would rather hear from him, and you've heard enough of me. Thank you, sir. The floor, gentlemen, is yours. Okay.
Thank you, Secretary Shultz, for starting the series with General Myatt and General Hewley for continuing it. Very stimulating conversations that take place here that are very important and timely. And we're honored to be here tonight, and welcome back.
Thanks, Mike. What a privilege it is to be with you. And I just want to say what a privilege it is to be with all of you. Thank you for coming tonight. And thanks to Secretary Shultz in particular. What an honor it is to be with you at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University and to have the privilege of participating in a lecture series that bears your name. Someone who has set an example, I think, for all of us of service to our nation, selfless service and tremendous contributions from service in the military and the Marines in World War II. And then what you've done, I think, to set the course for this new century. And what you have given us, I think, are tremendous opportunities in this country. And I think what Mike and I will have an opportunity to talk about is how we take advantage of the opportunities you helped to create. So thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thanks to Mike Myatt, an old dear friend, and for Jan Hooley as well for the privilege of being with you.
Well, General, we normally take questions at the end of the presentation, but we don't have time because we want to spend more time with you. So it's incumbent upon me to ask the most important question. So I'll start with the most important question first, and that is the National Security Council really the ultimate backdoor into Stanford?
Hey, well, I'm just going to paraphrase David Brooks, who says, I only teach at institutions that I could not have gotten into.
But what was it like waking up in Palo Alto last Wednesday as opposed to being in Washington for all the Mueller mania and whatever? When you woke up that morning, did you feel somewhat blessed and relieved?
Well, what you don't realize, it's very arduous there in Palo Alto and at Stanford and Hoover. No, I mean, it was quite a change, obviously. But I'd been through this pattern across my career of challenging assignments, some of them in combat, and then an opportunity which the military gives you, and our Army gives you in particular, I think, is an opportunity to then reflect on that challenging experience and to read and think and learn and discuss and write and prepare yourself for the next level of responsibility. So it felt like a natural transition to me. I'm going to miss a lot about our Army and the military. I'll miss most about that. I think the opportunity to work with great, young, motivated Americans. And I'll have an opportunity to do that now in a university setting. So I'm thrilled to be there.
Given your illustrious military career, your academic career, your policy career, what was more daunting and gut-wrenching? Cresting a hill in the Middle East to find more Iraqi tanks in front of you than you had with you at the time? Or sitting on that couch in 2017 next to President Trump, having accepted a job that repeatedly people had passed over and looking at all the media at that time? How did you feel?
Well, I felt grateful for the opportunity to continue serving. In many ways, my duties and responsibilities as Assistant to the President for National Security was a bonus round for me, right? I had served in the Army by that time for 33 years, and I was on a path to retiring from the Army, wasn't sure what we were going to do. And so the opportunity to continue serving, our president and our nation, to me was a tremendous privilege. And I was completely surprised by this, Mike. I mean, I was walking in my hometown of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Any Phillies fans here? Sixers fans. All right, so the Sixers, I mean, I'm telling you, they're the team to beat now, I think.
Easy. We got a long night here.
But
the Warriors.
But my phone rang, and it was the White House, and asking me if I could go to Mar-a-Lago the next day for an interview. So it really came out of the blue. But then, as I had at least a few moments to reflect on my career, I was very grateful for, I think, many opportunities that help prepare somebody as much as anybody can be prepared for a job of such broad scope and responsibility. So, I think that I really had an opportunity to make good on some of the criticisms maybe that I held about the direction that our foreign policy, our national security strategy had taken in recent years. I felt as if we had been complacent and overconfident in the post-Cold War period, and that overconfidence had somehow shifted to really pessimism, almost defeatism in more recent years. And so I felt that this was a tremendous opportunity to help restore our strategic competence as a nation at a time at which I felt that we're really, and I think today, we are at the end of the beginning of a new era. And I think that we're behind. We're behind because we weren't competing effectively against really critical rivals and adversaries. We had become, I think, passive in connection with this overconfidence. And then I believed that in more recent years, we had seen our disengagement from complex problem sets overseas as an unmitigated good. So, if you're going to complain about, to use the vernacular, those bastards up a platoon, right? If you're a soldier, once you have that leadership responsibility and opportunity to lead or to contribute, to the president's ability to advance and protect our interests, I think it's certainly, as a military officer, it's your duty to give it your best shot.
And as a military officer, what's the primary motivation here? Is it more your kind of supreme can-do confidence, having been thrown a lot of other challenges and having to figure it out and accomplish the mission? Or was it kind of an intense sense of patriotism, knowing where the country was at the time?
Well, I just think that any opportunity to serve is a privilege, and I think that maybe sometimes in our society today, we tend to look at service in the military through, I think, the lens of popular culture. And I think these days, popular culture tends to cheapen and coarsen military service and the warrior ethos in particular. And what service in our military, what service in our intelligence agencies, in our government broadly, gives you an opportunity to do is to be part of something bigger than yourself and to be part of a team in our military in which the man or woman next to you is willing to give everything, including their own lives for you. And so I think that there are these less tangible rewards that it's difficult for people to see. I mean, it's much easier to see, the risks and the sacrifices and the hardships associated with service. So I was anxious and grateful for the opportunity to serve as National Security Advisor. And I think that we were able to, in that year, serve the president well, and I think administer, in many cases, a corrective to what had been unwise policies, or really the absence of policies and strategies for what I think we now recognize are our greatest challenges to national security.
I think across the political spectrum, people felt somewhat surprised but glad there were 3 generals on duty at the time. But anybody who's worked with the military in the last decade or two has seen how much more competent the military overall, and especially the senior military leaders, have become. So it wasn't a real surprise. I'd been embedded in Iraq and Afghanistan. I could see the difference between when I served in Vietnam, how much more capable the senior officers were. Given that, where did that come from? I mean, academically, I know you guys had a lot of background, but was it what you were asked to do in these kind of asymmetrical wars where you had to come up with solutions? Was that kind of the training ground to make you guys so capable?
Well, I think the most important skills that I was able to bring to this job, I think was mainly the gift I'd been given by the Army to, as my full-time job, read, think, study, discuss, and write about history. And the topic that I chose turned out to be quite relevant, which was a topic that involved national security decision-making in time of war. So I think that academic perspective, as well as the range of experiences, helped me understand better my responsibilities, and then how to best serve the president and the country in that job. Now, as Secretary Shultz can tell you better than anybody, there really is no ideal preparation for these jobs where you have such a broad scope of responsibility. But I think the experiences that are relevant are experiences that help you ask the right questions, help you frame problems so you can first understand. I think sometimes as Americans, we rush right to, okay, what are we going to do about this? And as a result, we can confuse activity with progress. I think it's skills that involve the ability to build teams across multiple organizations and bring to bear on a challenge or a problem an interdisciplinary perspective. People who think differently about these problems, and then bring with them across our departments and agencies different tools and different ways to address these problems. Identify the synergies that we can achieve between various efforts. And then I think a skill set or an experience that's important is, I think it's important to understand what it takes to get something done, right? Not to talk about it, not to write a policy paper, but how do you implement a strategy? And then it doesn't hurt, I don't think, to have on-the-ground experience in really complex environments that involve multiple political, economic, social, cultural dynamics. Because I think what you want to be able to do is to be able to think about these problems in a way that allows you to understand what the obstacles are to overcome, but also to see where there are opportunities, to understand how you can influence your efforts along with like-minded partners, these situations, to kind of shift the balance in favor of our interests and our principles and our values. And so I think it's important to have a sense of the difficulties, but also to not be paralyzed, by risks and difficulties, and to see beyond that to opportunities. But at the same time, recognize the limits of the agency and control you have over some of these complex problems. So I haven't had, I've got more time to reflect now, and I'll do that. But I just remember sensing as I walked into that office, McGeorge Bundy's old office, and I had written so much about his role in national security decision-making and the decisions that led to the Americanization of the war in Vietnam. I just felt gratitude. I felt the weight of responsibility, but I was very grateful for the opportunity to have studied the early National Security Council process, and then also the personalities and relationships that are so critical to the formulation of policy and strategy.
You said that you interviewed a lot of the previous national security advisors to get their advice. I'm particularly interested in what did some of the former military types tell you? Guys like Brent Scowcroft. Yeah.
Well, I talked to every living former national security advisor within and that's the historian in me, right? I mean, to say, what advice do you have?
I mean, on the job or before you went to Washington? Or?
No, I had no time. So I was essentially, I got a one-day delay to go to Mar-a-Lago. So this was on Friday of President's Day weekend. I flew to Mar-a-Lago on Sunday. I went home to our house in Southern Virginia. I wasn't living in Washington. Packed a bag. My son-in-law was there. He was on his way back from a bachelor's weekend in advance of his wedding to our daughter, Colleen. And so I packed a bag. I pulled books off the shelf to take with me. We did a workout at the gym together, my son-in-law and I got on an Osprey and flew back to Washington. This was President's Day Mondays when I got back home. And then I started work Tuesday afternoon. I walked into the White House Tuesday afternoon. And so not a lot of time for reflection. I mean, there was a job to be done, though, and one of the books I pulled off the shelf was Peter Rodman's Presidential Command, which is an excellent book that compares and contrasts the different approaches of different national security advisors, what their experiences were. And then, of course, I sought the advice of former national security advisors. Dr. Kissinger was one of the first who Secretary Shultz has a long and and close relationship with Dr. Kissinger. And Katie and I had the real privilege of being together, enjoying Secretary Shultz's hospitality as we are tonight with Dr. Kissinger recently. But he came into the office. There was still nothing in my office. I had just gotten there. And so I was asking him questions about his experience. And at one point I said, how did you find time to think about complex problems, to disconnect from day-to-day events? And he said in that great accent, he said, you cannot.
Thanks.
He said, in this job, you will create no new knowledge. You will consume the knowledge you already have.
Have a ball.
So I did learn a lot on the job, I must tell you. But then you asked about Brent Scowcroft, and I consciously modeled what we endeavored to do in the National Security Council staff and running the process after his model. It's known as the Scowcroft model for good reason. And essentially what Brent Scowcroft did is he prioritized his responsibility, and we could talk about this if you want. I think there are 5 main responsibilities you have as a National Security Advisor, but one of them is to run a process that allows coordination and integration across all the departments and agencies to give the president options, right? And to help develop, as you present these options, develop integrated strategies designed to advance and protect American interests and promote American prosperity and to advance our influence and our principles. And so that process that we put in place was modeled very consciously after General Scowcroft's model. And I spent 2 hours in his office. He was very gracious, and he gave me tremendous advice, as did the other former National Security Advisors as well. All of them had a different perspective. All of them highlighted different lessons. And I had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Brzezinski. And it turned out that, sadly, this was just maybe a month or 2 months before he passed away. And he focused mainly on the importance of relationships and fostering effective relationships. So I think it was tremendously valuable to me to consult those who could help me think about these new duties and responsibilities in the context of how could I best serve the president and the country.
Speaking of relationships, what about a predecessor like General Jim Jones, who had served under the Obama administration, who said that he could never really break through the political in-circles and didn't feel he could have been as effective as he was. He said something about the water bugs don't know anything about war.
Right.
Did that kind of loom in your mind about how you're going to kind of break through the politics that were going to face you?
Well, General Jones, what a tremendous gentleman he is, and one of the things he did for me is he convened a dinner of former National Security Advisors, and of course, one of them is now our colleague at Hoover, Secretary Rice, who was just a phenomenal leader and just the most gracious person, and so. During this dinner, it was great because they all sort of fed off each other, and here's something else to consider, and so General Jones was super helpful to me, and I think what I concluded from my experience and from my conversations with General Jones on this issue of relationships is that I think there are 3 types of people who serve in any administration. And Secretary Shultz, I'd like to talk to you about this tomorrow, maybe, and see what you think, is there are those who are there to serve the president and the country. And they see it in the context of a National Security Advisor job, for example, of presenting options to the president, recognizing that, hey, the American people elected the president. And so it's your job to present options and then to assist with the execution of that president's decisions. I think there's a second group of people who serve, in any administration, and these are people who are there maybe not necessarily to serve the president, but they're there to serve their own agendas. And rather than give that president options, what they would prefer to do is try to manipulate decisions to get outcomes consistent with their agenda, again, not the president's agenda. And then I think there sometimes is a third group of people who sort of cast themselves in the role of saving the country, or maybe the world from the president, right? And so but so I think that really the only true motivation is that first group, because the second group and the third group are actually undermining the Constitution of the United States. Hey, guess what? Nobody elected you, into your position, and therefore you're not accountable directly to the American people. And so the checks on a president, for example, should be exercised through the American people, because that was the radical idea of our revolution, is that sovereignty doesn't lie with a king. It doesn't lie even with a parliament. It lies with the people. And they exercise their will through elections of the executive, of the chief executive, of the president, but also the elections of their representatives in Congress, who, based on the brilliance of our founders, balance the executive branch along with the judiciary. So I saw my role as doing the best I could to serve the elected president and to do so consistent with the Constitution.
Speaking of process and these groups that you've defined here, one of the first challenges of your process seemed to try to get the Joint Chiefs of Staff back at the table, having been replaced by political appointees, Steve Bannon and others. How tough of a fight was that?
It really wasn't. I mean, I think, and maybe, I don't know, naively, I just thought that it was important to base any recommendations that I made to the president on what was best for the president and his agenda and the country, right? And so I thought, for how we organized the permanent members, right, of the National Security Council, and these are the principals that are convened from across the government to sit in on formal National Security Council meetings. Now, there aren't a whole lot of those. I mean, they happen, when it's time to recommend approval of a strategy or in response to a crisis. But many of the meetings happen, less formally, maybe in the Oval Office, or there are small group meetings and so forth. So this document that outlines who are the formal members is an important document, but it's not a be-all and end-all. And so I thought it was important to communicate to the American people that domestic political considerations were not primary when we were talking about national security and foreign affairs related decisions. And so Mr. Bannon's predecessors had not been on that permanent committee. And so my recommendation was that we model that committee based on really what its purpose is. And then, but I really believed very strongly with security considerations and paramount and so forth, but to be as transparent and collaborative as possible. I didn't believe in hiding a planning effort, unless, some are very sensitive and they need to be hidden to a very small group. But I really believe that if we were going to get the buy-in across the departments and agencies, and then also avail ourselves of the tremendous talent that exists across our government, that we ought to be as transparent and collaborative as possible. So it wasn't an effort to shut anybody out. It was just an effort to do what I regarded as the right thing in connection with communicating to the American people. Hey, this is, when we're talking about national security and foreign policy, that we are looking at the long-term interests of the American people.
How much of that goes back to this book, Dereliction of Duty, that you wrote, that you studied what went wrong during the LBJ administration? And if I understand it correctly, one of your biggest complaints was how the military was marginalized, how they didn't really have a seat at the table, and the president really wasn't getting the full assessment from a military perspective. As you saw that the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joe Dunford, was not represented at the table, was that very obvious to you that you had to correct that?
Yeah, it was. And the reason for this is that I cannot think of a historical example in which giving a president fewer perspectives or fewer options, right, was better than giving a president more perspectives and more options. And I think that the president deserves best military advice. And so the period that I wrote about, during the period I wrote about, the real problems had to do with, first of all, a compromise essentially of principle for expediency. in which the president's top civilian and military advisors decided, hey, it was better to tell the president what the president wanted to hear. And then over time, really argue for the kinds of decisions and resources and a strategy that they felt was required at the outset to address the problem set in Vietnam. And what this did is it prevented any kind of discussion of other options because the only option discussed was the strategy that was designed mainly for the president's domestic political priorities, as Lyndon Johnson's in 1964 and 65. First, he get elected in his own right in 1964, and then to pass the important civil rights and Great Society legislation in 64 and 65. But he didn't really ever come to the problem set of Vietnam on its own terms. What he saw Vietnam as a danger to those domestic goals, and so didn't want to talk about it. And so Secretary McNamara develops a strategy for the war based on the president's desire to keep Vietnam on the back burner. And so by doing so, again, it masked any kind of discussion of long-term costs and consequences. It prevented the discussion of other options. And actually, it aided and abetted the president's effort to circumvent the Constitution of the United States and deny the American people, or at least their representatives in Congress, a say in decisions that involved life and death, right? And so I brought to the job really a determination to provide the president with multiple options and the best analysis and advice possible. Now, since Vietnam, there have been some procedural and organizational improvements, right? The Goldwater-Nichols Act created the combatant commands and gave voice not only to the Joint Chiefs of Staff as principal military advisors to the Secretary of Defense and Commander-in-Chief, but also it gave voice to these combatant commanders who, importantly, command joint forces. One of the problems with the advice that chiefs gave in this period, and one of the reasons why they compromised principle for expediency, is they were beset by service parochialism. And so therefore did not raise very grave concerns about what they thought was a fatally flawed strategy in Vietnam. So for example, the most prestigious naval command was going to go to an Air Force officer, Jacob Smart. And Admiral McConnell, the chief of naval operations, went in to Secretary McNamara and said, "You can't do that." I mean, he didn't want to be the chief of naval operations who was known for giving away Pacific Command. And McNamara, Secretary McNamara said to him, "Okay, I'll keep it Navy, but what I want you to do is make sure you support me on Vietnam." He said Vietnam and other decisions. And Admiral McConnell, I think very bravely in his oral history, he said, maybe we should have stood up and pounded the table. He said, "I'm ashamed of myself."
You mentioned the Marine Corps at the time. You said that Commandant Green
Right.
was probably one of the first to stand up and say, "We need more people. We need a better plan."
Right.
And then, feeling the pressure on the existence of the Marine Corps, he got subdued.
Well, General Green, he thought very clearly about the problem in Vietnam. He kept tremendous notes, and I was an Army guy infiltrating the Marine Corps history, organization at the Naval Yard, and General Simmons, who since passed away, what a wonderful person who was running the Marine Corps Historical Association at the time, and I kept reading all these other notes of meetings or interviews, and I would say, "Hey, check with Wallace Green. He took notes on everything." And I thought, I've got to get into these papers.
Well, we know about note-taking now. That's come up a little bit, that you were one of the more prolific note-takers in the White House.
30 years later, it was 30 years later. And so General Simmons, his big litmus test for me was, at one point, my third meeting with him, and I was researching in other collections, and he said, "Hey, what do you think about Maxwell Taylor's role?" And I said, "Well, actually, it was a disappointment for me, because Maxwell Taylor was a great hero of World War II, known as a soldier scholar, wrote an important book in the 1950s criticizing defense policy, was seen as a warrior intellectual. But his performance of his duties when he was called back in this unprecedented position to serve in the Kennedy White House as senior military advisor to the president. And then later, when out of retirement, he's put in as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And then later, when he's ambassador to Vietnam, was not, I think, an honorable performance of his duties in this period. In fact, he endeavored to sort of shut the chiefs out from the advisory process, diminish their voice, help divide them so their voice would be ineffective. And so I relayed what I read from the evidence to General Simmons, and then he said, okay, take a seat outside. And I sat on this little austere bench outside his office, as an Army major. And then he called me back in. He had talked to Wallace Green. He said, okay, you can get into the papers. And what I found in these papers were very honest notes. And Wallace Green had been adamant in Joint Chiefs of Staff meetings in saying, hey, if we go to war in Vietnam, it's going to take 500,000 troops in 5 years, right? And we have to tell the president that. But then what he was subjected to was what Robert Cairo, others have called the Johnson treatment, right? And as he came into the Oval Office, and I think in April of '65, don't quote me on that, it's in the book somewhere. Johnson put his arm around Wallace Green, and he said, I really need some good recommendations, from you today. Well, before this meeting, the chiefs had met and said, hey, when we go to the White House, we're going to stick to the number. It's going to that the only number of troops that's going to make a difference in South Vietnam now is 100,000. So they had the meeting, and it's President Johnson. It's in the Oval Office, the two chairs at the end of you've seen the Oval Office, right? And Robert McNamara is sitting next to him, and the chiefs are lined up on the couches. And President Johnson turns first to Earl Wheeler, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he said, how many troops is it going to take, to make a difference? But first he prepped the chiefs by saying, hey, I want you to tell me what you need. I'll give you anything you need. Tell me what it's going to take to kill more Viet Cong, as if that was the big problem in Vietnam. It's just killing more Viet Cong. And so it really reflected a very superficial understanding or misunderstanding of the problem. So Earl Wheeler sticks to what the chiefs agreed and says, hey, 100,000 troops. And he said, I can't give you 100,000 troops. He said, mothers would come out of their kitchens and take their aprons off, is what Johnson says. So he turns to Harold K. Johnson, who's the Chief of Staff of the Army, and says, okay, General Johnson, what do you think? And he sticks to the line, 100,000 troops. And he said, I can't do that. He said, I can't do that. Let me tell you a story. He said, I want you to all imagine that you're businessmen, and you're businessmen in Johnson City, Texas, and your business is failing, and you go to the bank, and it's Mr. McNamara's bank, and you tell them you need a loan for $100,000 to keep your business afloat. And Mr. McNamara tells you, I can't give you a $100,000 loan, but I can give you a $10,000 loan. He said, what do you do? Do you take the $10,000 or do you let your business go under? Okay, so think about all the problems with this metaphor applied to war, first of all. But then he goes to Wallace Green, and Wallace Green says, I think 10,000 Marines would do a hell of a lot of good in Vietnam. So what General Green had been promised was a third active duty Marine division in exchange for him going along with what he knew was a fundamentally flawed strategy. In fact, there have been 2 war games in 1964, and these were really solid efforts where they brought in the head of the social science department at West Point, who was a real intellect, and he helped frame these war games that were done in the Pentagon. The principals kind of came in and out to the war game. But the war game began, then in 1964, and it ended in 1969 with 500,000 troops in Vietnam, no clear path to the achievement of our objectives, and the American people losing faith in the effort and calling for the withdrawal of our soldiers. And so what was, I think, important about the new evidence that I was learning about and accessing and researching the book is these were men who not only should have known better, right, as McNamara said, right? Secretary McNamara said, Vietnam, he portrayed Vietnam as this quagmire, that sucked an unwitting American government into a war it didn't understand. I mean, these were men who not only should have known better, but who did know better and who did it anyway. And so explaining why and how that happened, I think, was an important story. And I guess to get back to the point, sorry for the digression, is that, I did learn a lot from that and tried to apply what I learned to my responsibilities.
So going forward now, so what were the big lessons you learned from researching the book and studying that period? If there was a mantra that you had to take into your job now in 2017, what were the cardinal rules or cardinal sins that you had to avoid?
Yeah, well, I think the first is to ensure that you're giving the president the benefit, not just of like your opinion, right, or your advice, as if you're some oracle, but to run a process that gives the president access to the best advice and analysis across our departments and agencies, but when necessary, from the private sector, from academia, and so that was the first aspect of the job. And I was going to mention to you what I think a national security advisor has 5 key responsibilities, and we're talking about the first one of those, which is to staff the president, to provide the president with the analysis, with the information that he needs to discharge his duties in office, and that's in my case preparation for foreign leader visits and phone calls and any engagement on foreign policy or national security. The second responsibility is to run that process, to deliver options to the president, to draft and request approval for strategies to advance and protect our interests, to run a process that allows you to respond rapidly to crises if they occur, and then to run a process also that assists really with the sensible execution. You don't execute from the White House, but to understand, what are the actions, initiatives, programs that are to be done simultaneously, sequentially, and then to help curate those strategies and efforts over time. So it's staffing the president, it's that process. The third is to help communicate the president's decisions and actions across the departments and agencies and to relevant audiences. Sometimes a public audience, although I think a national security advisor is best behind the scenes. Sometimes our cabinet secretaries were not, predisposed toward going on camera and so forth, so I had to do more of that than I really wanted to do. But also to communicate to other audiences on the Hill and so forth, sometimes foreign audiences. But then the fourth key aspect of the job is to help maintain unity of effort with allies, with partners, like-minded partners internationally. And so while, of course, that is the primary responsibility of the Secretary of State, engaging with your counterparts and the offices of their presidents and prime ministers is an important function as well. And then finally, you have to lead. You have to lead an organization of extremely dedicated, talented people, which was a real privilege for me, and to make them feel like they're part of an organization that's bound together by mutual trust and respect and common purpose, to know that they're going to work every day and they're making a difference for their country and for the president, and then to build an organization also in that fifth area of responsibility of leadership that is valued and trusted across our government and by foreign governments and so forth. So of the first of those, staffing the president, I think what I concluded is that I owed the president the best from across our government and a process that would deliver that. That entailed certainly, not telling the president, what he wanted to hear, right? And I think that it would be a disservice to any president to do that. And it's not courageous. I didn't have the courage to not tell the president what I thought the president didn't want to hear, right? I mean, I think that's an important aspect of those responsibilities. And then I think also a lesson that I brought into this is that we need to have strategies. I mean, we need to have goals and objectives, and we need to improve our strategic competence. I made that really an explicit goal for us, and essentially what we did is we framed what we believed were the priority national security challenges by really asking first order questions. What is the nature of this challenge, right? Because again, we tend to rush into action. And then once we developed that kind of an understanding of the challenge, we then viewed that challenge through the lens of our vital interests, crafted overarching goals, more specific objectives, and then made some assumptions. This is together as a team, really with the State Department in the lead almost all the time. For some of these challenges, other departments and agencies had the lead. But then to make some assumptions, especially about what are the opportunities, but what are the limits on the degree of agency and control we and like-minded partners have over this challenge? Because some challenges, as Secretary Shultz knows better than anybody, you can't just overcome them. Some problems just can't be solved. Some have to be sort of managed over time. And then once we had that framework and the principals discussed it, we would bring it to the president for approval. He would then approve it typically or modify it, and then it would send out a cabinet memo to the departments and agencies, and we had a policy in place. But we didn't stop there. The teams, now with the benefit of guidance from the senior cabinet officials, then worked on developing these strategies. Strategies which aimed, if I could just generalize, at really shifting the balance back in favor of the United States and the free and open societies of the world. And this was based, I think, on this recognition that we all had, is that we are in a competition. And we all felt that we were behind in connection with some of these regional challenges and some of these functional challenges as well, such as in cyberspace or space as a competitive domain.
Sounds like a great plan. What could possibly go wrong?
It was like clockwork.
Like clockwork. Yeah, where they say the enemy always has a vote on any plan. All right, so you cross the line of departure. Game on. So as things start to transpire now, how much of that process were you able to maintain?
Yeah, we were able to maintain it, and we modified it based on how the president receives information. I told you I went to work on Tuesday afternoon, and on Thursday I called what's called an all-hands meeting, and I talked to our team about how I viewed the critical tasks, what our mission was, as the National Security Council staff, what I thought the key tasks were. They sort of aligned, not directly, but aligned with what I just told you. I thought were our main areas of responsibility. And then I just gave them a little bit of philosophy, which I think should be obvious to all of us. I said, hey, what we could do as a National Security Council staff is we could develop what we think is the perfect National Security Council staff process and the perfect National Security Council staff products, and then ask the president, who's been around for a while, right, and is probably a little bit set in his ways, to adapt to what we think is the best. Or what we can do is we can adapt our processes and products to best serve the president. And obviously we have to do the latter, right? And so we run a process across departments and agencies, but also these products and efforts have to serve the president in a way that he's comfortable with. Now, how did it work? Any big organization, as all of you, I'm sure, know, is not without friction and difficult, personalities and relationships and so forth. But I really thought our team did a very good job of keeping our eye on that mission. And so what did we do? We went from strategic patience on North Korea to maximum pressure. Well, we'll see how that plays out. We might talk about that. We went from, kind of a policy of strategic engagement, a pretty passive approach to the aggressive policies of the Chinese Communist Party, to a policy of competition, right? And not on I think as the best way to avoid confrontation, we have to be able to compete effectively and counter Chinese unfair trade and economic practices, the sustained campaign of industrial espionage that they've been waging against us, the military aggression that we see in the South China Sea, their use of co-option and coercion in this sort of debt trap associated with this One Belt, One Road initiative. So that was a really, I think, a multi-generational shift in policy that was required, based on the policies and actions of the Chinese Communist Party and its leadership. On Russia, we put in a strategy to counter Russian, really sustained campaign of political subversion, disinformation, and propaganda against the West. And of course, this is the biggest topic of conversation in our country about the degree to which the administration has been committed to it. But I think if you look at the actions that occurred, to really counter this pernicious form of, I think, political warfare against us, we took it very seriously and put a policy in place. I won't go on, but Iraq and Syria, the counter-ISIS campaign, the Afghanistan strategy, the Iraq strategy. There were major policy announcements and speeches associated with these, And all of these shifts are contained in the highly readable, page-turning December 2017 National Security Strategy, which I reckon it's just in time for take it with you to the beach.
There will be a quiz.
But
yeah.
I think it's a substantive document and describe these big shifts. So to answer your question, okay, it didn't always go smoothly, but I think the process did serve the president. And if you look at the concrete policy results, beyond what you see on social media and so forth, that they were significant, important, and many of them were kind of overdue.
Military loves to have a process. They love to have a strategy. They don't like to improvise, especially when things go wrong. Setting the agenda, something like retaliating the Syrian chemical attacks.
Yeah.
That was presented to you. I don't know, that wasn't high on the agenda, but all of a sudden it was something you had to deal with.
Right.
How'd the process work then?
Well, I'm a cavalry officer. You probably noticed that because of how dashing. No, I'm not kidding. So, but in the cavalry, we're disappointed when things go according to plan, right? So I think that really studying war and warfare, you have to recognize that progress in any complex endeavor is never linear, right? And this is because of what Karl von Clausewitz called the continuous interaction of opposites. I got into the job at the end of February, and there was a high degree of concurrent activity. As you know, that even before I got into the job, North Korea had launched a missile in the direction of Japan while President Abe was at Mar-a-Lago for a summit. And so, of course, and President Obama, on his way out, had said to President Trump in this all too brief period of civility, right? In the presidential handover, President Obama had said, hey, I think the biggest problem we're going to have, immediate problem, is going to be North Korea. So it wasn't necessarily a surprise. So North Korea was front and center on the priorities, as was China, because President Xi was we knew probably in April timeframe was going to visit Mar-a-Lago as well, and it would be important to at least frame a China strategy and approach prior to that, and to have discussions about our how we viewed the policies of the Chinese Communist Party and really what a strategy might be to help protect our interests better. Then, of course, is when right before the Mar-a-Lago summit is when this mass murder attack occurs in Syria at Khan Shaykhun, and so what this highlighted, I think, is how that brutal, murderous civil war couldn't really just be contained, right? And this was, I think, an assumption that was made earlier in that civil war, in that this is a problem that can just be contained and managed from the periphery. But what we saw is at this stage of the war, half the Syrian population was dead, wounded, or displaced by this time. Half of the population, and this, of course, had created terrible human suffering and misery inside of Syria. But it had also destabilized countries in the region: Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, and, as we know, it also had a destabilizing influence because of the migration into Europe, and the combination of that with the rise of these nativist parties in Europe and so forth. This was President Putin's dream, and he was helping to create this catastrophe based on his support for the Iranians and for the Assad regime. And it was past time to enforce what had been the unenforced red line in Syria in 2012-13. So what we needed to do is to provide the president with options. And I'll tell you, I think the cabinet at that time really demonstrated the best of their qualities and abilities. Our Secretary of State and Defense, I think, did a tremendous job, as so did our intelligence community. Really, all the departments and agencies worked very hard together to present options to the president. Treasury, everybody was involved with this. And so we met initially with the president in the Situation Room, and you're not really supposed to talk about deliberations, but I'll just say, to characterize them, that these meetings were very, very focused and provided options to the president. I think he made what is clearly, in retrospect, the right decision on this. and talk about concurrent activity, right? The president held the final meeting as we arrived at Mar-a-Lago for the summit, made the decision. Of course, then it's up to mainly the Department of Defense to execute, which they did, and our armed forces did brilliantly. But it happened during the meeting with President Xi. But I left before dessert to get an update and received the update that the strike had occurred, and brought a note to the president. And then he leaned over at the dinner and told President Xi, and then that summit, I think, went extremely well also. And the reason why I think that summit went well is because, of course, the primary topic of conversation was North Korea. And what you saw from the statements, the Chinese and U.S. statements afterwards, the Chinese statements in particular are very important, I think, to see, is that China really changed its messaging on North Korea at that time. China used to say, hey, this is really a problem, between North Korea and the United States. Why don't you talk about it?
But it's their problem. It's in their neighborhood.
But China said, this is a problem for the world. I mean, explicitly acknowledged, this is a problem for us. North Korea's nuclear missile problem is a problem for the world. The second key aspect of the message that was different about it is that typically you would hear language of, we call on all sides, as if we're part of the problem, and when we know as a matter of fact that every act of aggression on the Korean Peninsula since June of 1950 had been initiated by the North Korean regime. And then finally, the old language of freeze for freeze was off the table, and there was a buy-in that the only really acceptable outcome is denuclearization of the peninsula. So, I mean, I think if points were awarded, for difficulty, that was a period of high concurrent activity, and I think we had favorable outcomes. I mean, again, these problems don't just get solved, right? But I think favorable outcomes on the path to putting into place sensible strategies to advance and protect the American people, and advance and protect our interests.
As a lieutenant general and as a national security advisor, where was your ultimate loyalty? To the president or to the Constitution and Congress?
Well, it's clear to the Constitution of the United States, right? I mean, so that's what's different about us is that nobody swears allegiance to a king or a president, right? All of us who are sworn into federal office across all departments and agencies are sworn to support the Constitution of the United States, and so your duties and responsibilities must always be seen as consistent with that service to the Constitution. I did not feel at any time that when I was in the White House that a tension between serving the president or the Constitution, and I felt as if that it was my job again to provide options to the president, the best advice from across departments and agencies, and doing that job I think was wholly consistent, obviously, with service to the Constitution.
General, thank you for your service on the battlefield and inside the Beltway.
Thanks. Thank you. Hey, so can I just say one other thing here in closing? Mike and I had talked about this. The last question also alluded to who are your heroes? Who do you look up to? And I think it's really tough to best George Washington and George Marshall in terms of their ethic to service. I think it's also very difficult to top another George, which is George Shultz, who's here with us tonight. So, and in terms of my heroes are people you never met and who you don't know about. And these are the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that I had the great privilege of serving with in combat. And what Americans don't see is the tremendous courage and selfless service of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. And I think we have to recognize that we are engaged today along modern day frontiers between barbarism and civilization. We don't pay enough attention to the nature of our enemies, the Taliban, the associated terrorist networks in South Asia, look at ISIS and what they did to our fellow human beings. And so I think that we ought to take the opportunity whenever we can, and I thank I thank God for this Marine Memorial to help connect our American citizens to those who fight and serve in their name. But I think we ought to take the opportunity whenever we can to celebrate American warriors, but also as humanitarians. And I think that today, more than ever, we might communicate to young people across our country these tremendous, as I mentioned at the beginning, less tangible rewards of service to our nation in many capacities across government, but in particular in our military. But Jan, I just want to say thanks to you, thanks to Mike, Secretary Shultz, for the privilege of being with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In closing, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say thanks, Mike. What a great job as a moderator. You've come a long way since you first started in this business. And I guess you really have accumulated all those awards, and you deserve them. But Lieutenant General McMaster, thanks. I know it sounds trite, but thanks for your service to the nation. We all know what you've gone through, thinking we know what you've gone through, but nobody really knows what it's really like to have those responsibilities when you're in Washington, D.C. And I know you're probably just getting a little rest now, and welcome back to California, sir. We appreciate you being here with us.
Thanks, Jeff.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for these gentlemen, please, one last time.
Thank you.
General McMaster's books are in the rear if you're interested. We've got future events coming up here at the Marines Memorial. On the 13th of May, we're going to have General Butch Neal, former Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, and Sergeant Major Canley, recent recipient of the Medal of Honor for the Vietnam Veterans Appreciation. That's going to be a good event. Please put that on your calendars as well. On the 6th of June, D-Day, we've got Brigadier McDonald, who's going to be a great presentation they put together with a historian from the Marine Corps Historical Society. 20 June, General Stan McChrystal will be here, and we've got some other great George Shultz lecturers coming up in the future. So thank you. We're always looking for people like any PBS station or any other nonprofit to help support these presentations. Thank you for coming, and thank you for those of you who are out there. You're still serving. I know some of you are. Thank you very much. Good night, and travel safely and going home.